If you are listening to this as night has already fallen, when the sounds of the outside world are slowly settling, yet inside your mind, there is still so much movement, unfinished thoughts, unanswered questions, the quiet weight of a long day, then this journey was created for you. Modern humans know so much, and yet rarely feel at rest. We understand the world with increasing clarity, while we ourselves become more indistinct. And perhaps what we need right now is not more information, but a silence deep enough for everything to slow down. Tonight, you do not need to try to understand the universe. We will simply move alongside it very slowly. Past distant planets, through the birth of time, through the great questions of existence and nothingness, not to arrive at final answers, but to allow the mind to rest within the questions themselves. As Carl Jung once wrote, the pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. Here there is no right or wrong. There is only a quiet space where you are allowed to let go, allowed not to know, and allowed to drift into sleep while the universe continues to move on, very gently, very far away, and very still. When human beings first began to lift their gaze toward the sky, it was not an act of science. It was an ancient reflex of the soul. Before writing existed before myth, before language was subtle enough to name fear or hope, humans already knew how to pause in the night. They lay on cold ground or leaned against stone and looked up into the darkness above their heads. There were no telescopes, no star charts, only quiet points of light scattered through the dark, and a feeling difficult to name, rising from within the feeling of standing before something vast. The earliest human questions did not begin with how, but with why. Why is the sky there? Why are we here? Why is there light in the night? And why is there darkness within ourselves? Philosophy was born from that moment, not in libraries, not in lecture halls, but in the silent encounter between human beings and the universe. When Thales, Anaximander, or Heraclitus reflected on the nature of reality, they did not possess more data than we do today. But they had time, they had listening, they had the ability to remain still long enough for a question to reach its deepest point. Aristotle once wrote in Metaphysics, "All men by nature desire to know." Yet this desire at its beginning was not about conquest. It was closer to a whisper than a declaration. Humans did not seek to dominate the sky, they sought to understand their place beneath it, to understand so as to fear less, to understand so as not to feel entirely lost. Across thousands of years, the sky remained, but the way we looked up changed. Myth slowly gave way to philosophy. Philosophy gradually yielded to science. Gods with human faces were replaced by equations, by laws, by numbers precise and cold. And strangely, the more we learned about the universe, the smaller we began to feel. When Copernicus moved Earth out of the center, it was not only a scientific shock, it was a psychological one. When Galileo saw moons circling Jupiter, when Newton realized that the same force pulling an apple to the ground also held planets in their paths, humanity began to understand that the universe does not revolve around us. We are only a very small part of a vast, indifferent structure, unconcerned with personal fears or dreams. And then, in the 20th century, when Einstein showed that space and time are not fixed, when the universe was revealed not merely to exist, but to expand, when light has limits and time itself can slow, the last sense of familiarity dissolved. Even the foundations we believed to be most solid became flexible, fragile. Yet one thing remains unchanged. Whether we call it divinity, logos, physical law, or the fabric of space-time, humanity always returns to the same question: where are we in all of this? Carl Sagan once wrote in Cosmos, "We are a way for the universe to know itself." This line is often quoted as a hopeful affirmation, but if you listen slowly enough, it also carries a gentle loneliness. For if the universe needs humans in order to know itself, then most of the time the universe is utterly silent, and within that silence, humans learn how to listen. When you lie here tonight hearing these words, you are repeating an ancient act. You are looking up at the sky, whether with your eyes or with your imagination. And perhaps like those who came tens of thousands of years before you are not truly searching for answers. You are searching for connection, to know that your questions are not alone, that many others once lay in the night asking the same things. Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. The sky outside is full of stars, but the sky within human beings is full of chaos. And perhaps that is precisely why we need to look upward, not to escape ourselves, but to realize that chaos is not a mistake. It is a beginning. Just as the universe itself, as far as we know, began from an unimaginable state of disorder. Modern science allows us to measure the distances to galaxies, calculate the age of light, and trace the universe's 13.8 billion year history. But it cannot replace the feeling humans have carried from the very beginning, the feeling of standing before something greater than oneself and therefore becoming humble. Perhaps in a world saturated with noise and information, healing does not come from knowing more, but from remembering that first moment when humans simply looked at the sky without purpose, without ambition, without the need to prove anything. Just looking, just breathing, letting the question exist. The universe does not require you to understand it. It only invites you to be with it for a while, in silence. And if your eyelids grow heavy, if the stars in your mind begin to fade, that too is perfectly fine. Because even when you sleep, the sky is still there. The questions are still there. And this journey, like the journey of humanity itself, does not need to hurry. After human beings learned to lift their gaze toward the sky and remain long enough with those first questions, something very natural occurred. That gaze no longer lingered only on distant stars, but slowly turned back toward what was closest in the night sky. An object neither dazzling nor brilliant, yet always present. A familiar face quietly accompanying us through long nights. The moon. If the sky was where humans first sensed vastness, then the moon was where that vastness became intimate. It was not so far as to be invisible, nor so close as to become ordinary. It sat at just the right distance to be seen, to be remembered, to become a companion for those who stay awake late, who cannot sleep, or who are simply searching for somewhere to rest their eyes in the dark. For billions of years, Earth and the moon have circled one another like two beings learning how to adapt to each other's presence. And yet by nearly every cosmological standard, the moon should not be so large. Compared to its parent planet, it is oversized. The size ratio between Earth and the moon is almost without precedent in the solar system. Most other moons are little more than fragments captured by gravity. Here instead, we find a pair that looks less like master and servant and more like near equals. This strangeness is not merely a curious detail of astronomy, it is a question. And like all great questions, it carried humanity far. When astronauts brought rocks from the lunar surface back to Earth, they carried more than samples. They carried the memory of an ancient event. Isotopic analysis revealed that moon rocks and Earth rocks are astonishingly similar, not like meteorites, not like Mars, but like two fragments of the same story separated by a violent moment in a distant past. From this, the giant impact hypothesis gradually emerged. A young planet named Theia once collided with the early Earth. Not a total annihilation, but an impact powerful enough to melt to mix and then to separate. From that blazing chaos, the moon was born, not as a stranger captured later, but as a part of Earth itself cast outward and compelled to return forever. If we often imagine birth as something gentle, this story reminds us that origins can be brutal. Yet from that brutality, a new balance emerged. The moon gradually stabilized Earth's axial tilt. It softened chaotic swings. It created tides, drawing the oceans into a steady rhythm. And within that rhythm, life found space to experiment, to adapt, to grow. Beneath all these scientific facts lies a very quiet idea that life on Earth in some way carries the imprint of the moon, not only in the seas, but within the human body itself. Biological rhythms, cycles, rises and falls, states we do not fully control. Carl Jung once wrote in Man and His Symbols, "The moon is the symbol of the unconscious." Perhaps it is no accident that humans so early associated the moon with what lies deepest within us, with dreams, with shifting moods, with what unfolds in the shadowed regions of the mind. While the sun represents consciousness, reason, the clear vision of day, the moon appears when things grow softer, slower, and easier to hear. If Earth is where we stand, the moon is where we look. It reflects light without producing its own. It does not impose or blaze. It gently allows us to see just enough. And perhaps this too is a profound form of healing, not illuminating everything, but letting some things remain safely in shadow. The bond between Earth and the moon is not perfect. It slows Earth's rotation. It drifts away year by year. Yet this imperfection creates time. It creates night. It creates moments in which humans can stop doing and begin feeling. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Observe constantly that all things take place by change." Earth and moon are a quiet testament to this truth. They do not remain still. They do not cling to what was. They change together very slowly in a dance that has lasted billions of years. And within that dance, humanity appears, observes, asks questions, and gradually realizes that it too is participating in a movement far larger than any single life. As you lie here listening to these words, the moon may be out there. It may be hidden by clouds. It may be only a thin crescent. But whether you see it or not, it is still there like an old friend who does not need daily conversation to remain present. And from this very concrete, very physical relationship, our journey of thought is ready to widen again. For if a single moon can shape an entire planet, if an ancient collision can open a path for life, then what of other worlds? Of planets that lost their water, of icy moons hiding oceans beneath their shells, of unfinished stories scattered across the solar system. But before moving on, allow yourself to stay here a little longer in reflected light, in slow rhythm, in the feeling that even within this vast and cold universe, there exist bonds deep enough to hold up a world and gentle enough to lull you into sleep very softly, very quietly. After remaining long enough with the quiet bond between Earth and the moon, one can begin to sense a question stirring beneath the surface of all the facts. No longer simply two worlds circling one another, but something deeper. Where did they come from? And strangely, the answer does not begin in gentleness, but in a moment of violence almost impossible to imagine. In the earliest days of the solar system, when everything was still hot, chaotic, and without stable form, Earth was not the calm planet we know today. It spun faster, it tilted at uncertain angles, and then in that distant span of time, a celestial body nearly the size of Mars, often called Theia, collided with Earth. Not a light touch, not a fleeting encounter, but an event powerful enough to melt the crust-hurl matter into space and permanently alter both worlds. The giant impact hypothesis does not tell a beautiful story in the conventional sense. but it tells a deeply truthful one about the universe, that order does not always arise from peace, that sometimes the most chaotic moments open the way to lasting stability. From the swirling debris after that collision, the moon slowly coalesced, not as a foreign object, but as a memory separated from Earth itself. What is striking is that after the impact, Earth slowed down. Its rotational momentum changed. Its axial tilt settled into a narrow range, stable enough for seasons to exist. No more extreme flips, no more violent oscillations. And within that stability, time found rhythm. Day, night, seasons, cycles. From a distance, this is a physical story, but listened to slowly, it becomes an inner one. For humans are much the same. We often believe growth comes from peaceful periods, yet so often what shapes us most deeply are collisions, upheavals, events, moments that shatter everything, only for it to rearrange itself into a new order, slower, steadier, and possible to live within. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." In this sense, the collision that gave birth to the moon was not merely a loss. It was a transformation that nature accepted, even required. Without it, Earth might still exist, but it would likely be a chaotic, unpredictable world where complex life never had time to take root. The moon's role did not end with its birth. From then on, it became a keeper of rhythm. Its gravity drew the oceans up and down, creating tides of patient, repeating motion without rest. In the shallow, ancient waters where tides rose and fell, molecules had time to gather separate and gather again. Not too fast, not too hurried, as though the universe itself were slowly testing the possibility of life. There is something very gentle here that science often mentions only in passing, but philosophy lingers with longer, that rhythm is a condition of life. Not only biological rhythm, but existential rhythm. Too fast and things break. Too slow and everything falls silent. The moon, in its quiet orbit, held Earth between those extremes. And over billions of years, Earth cooled. Oceans formed. The atmosphere stabilized. Life emerged, at first simple, fragile. Yet each generation was shielded from excessive upheaval, in part because of the moon, because the axial tilt did not swing wildly, because seasons did not become unbearable, because an old companion stood close enough to intervene, yet far enough not to overwhelm. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as a process of confronting the shadow. And perhaps on a cosmic scale, this formative collision was also a kind of shadow, unavoidable, disruptive, necessary for deeper structure to appear. Jung wrote in Psychology and Religion, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Earth did not become illuminated by light alone. It passed through the darkness of impact, of melting, of chaos. And from that passage, a stable structure slowly emerged. Life was not born from perfection, but from endurance and transformation. As you listen to these words, there may be collisions in your own inner world. Moments you wish had never happened, events that slowed you down, changed your direction, tilted you away from the old path. But seen from far enough away and held long enough in awareness, those changes may have created a new axis for your life, an angle stable enough for you to continue. The story of the moon's origin does not merely say that everything has a cause. It whispers that everything has consequences, and sometimes those consequences do not appear immediately. They require time, millions, billions of slow revolutions to become something that can nourish. When night falls and the moon hangs in the sky, it does not remind us of the collision. It does not display the violence of its origin. It simply reflects light evenly, quietly. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of this chapter, that what is born from chaos does not have to carry chaos forever. From here, our journey will continue outward away from Earth. For if a single collision can shape an entire planet, what happened to other worlds? Those without a moon large enough to keep rhythm, those where water once flowed and then vanished. But before moving on, allow yourself to stay here a little longer in the feeling that even within this harsh universe, there are upheavals not meant to destroy, but to open a way. And if your eyelids grow heavy, if your breath slows, let this story drift with you. The moon took a very long time to form. Life did too, and sleep does not need to hurry. After the collision that gave birth to the moon and granted Earth a rhythm stable enough for life to take root, our journey moves a little farther outward. No longer lingering with a world that has found its balance, we turn our gaze toward a planet that was once very much like Earth and then profoundly different. Mars. In the human imagination, Mars has always carried two faces. One is the red planet, dry cold, covered in dust and stone. The other is a distant memory of rivers, lakes, even oceans once spread beneath a different sky. And it is this contrast that makes Mars so compelling. It is not merely a foreign world, it is a reminder. Dry valleys, fossilized riverbeds, sedimentary plains recorded by rovers reveal an undeniable truth. Mars once had water. Not a few isolated traces of ice, but flowing water, standing water. Water that shaped the planet's surface over long stretches of time. There were moments in Martian history when, had you stood upon that ground, you might have heard the sound of currents, slow, steady, alive. Water anywhere in the universe carries a promise, not the promise of life guaranteed, but of possibility. An opening, a perhaps. And in its early era, Mars stood very close to that threshold. But then very slowly, very quietly, everything changed. There was no single moment of collapse, no explosive tragedy, only gradual loss. Mars's magnetic field weakened, then nearly vanished. There was no longer an invisible shield strong enough to hold its atmosphere against the solar wind. The air thinned, blown into space. Pressure fell. Temperatures dropped, and water what once flowed began to retreat. Some froze, some sublimated, some was lost forever to the void. Mars did not die in a dramatic sense. It dried out, like a memory no longer spoken of, like a feeling once vivid but no longer sustained by the conditions that made it possible. Here, science pauses to measure. Philosophy stays longer. Because the story of Mars is not only the story of a planet, it is the story of things that once had everything required to become and then lost one crucial element, sending everything down a different path. The philosopher Heraclitus suggested that the essence of reality is change. But he also knew that not every change leads to continuation. Some changes close doors. Mars is a distant yet clear example of a world that came close to life and then slipped past it. Albert Camus wrote in Return to Tipasa, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." This line is often read as encouragement, but set beside Mars, it carries another resonance. Not every summer is invincible. Not every world retains its inner warmth. And this is not a failure. It is the outcome of very specific, impersonal, and different conditions. Mars did not fail. It followed its own trajectory. No moon large enough to stabilize its tilt. No strong magnetic field to protect its atmosphere. Not enough mass to hold on to what was most fragile. And in that absence, water, the symbol of possibility, withdrew. There is something very quiet yet very deep in this story, that life does not only need a beginning, it needs support. It needs things we rarely notice: an invisible field, a satellite at the right distance, a rhythm not too severe. And when one of these disappears, the result is not immediate catastrophe, but a prolonged silence. If Earth is a world that was held, Mars is a world that was let go. Not out of malice, not out of error, simply because the conditions no longer met. When people look at Mars, they often ask, was there ever life there? But perhaps the more healing question is, what kept Earth from following that path? And beyond that, in our own lives, what is keeping the water from leaving? For within each person there are inner oceans, emotional currents, possibilities once vivid, then slowly drying as environments change. When protection fades, when the atmosphere of safety, connection, and meaning thins, Mars did not lose its water in a single night. It lost it over hundreds of millions of years. And this reminds us that many losses in life happen the same way, quietly, gradually, almost unnoticed until we look back. Yet precisely because of this, Mars becomes a patient teacher. It teaches us that what is fragile must be cared for early, that the most important conditions are often invisible, and that life anywhere is a temporary state, precious not because it lasts forever, but because it happens at all. As night falls and you listen to these words, you may be in a very different place from ancient Mars. But somewhere within you, there may still be dry regions, currents that have slowed or stopped. And that too is okay, because noticing dryness is already a form of awakening. From Mars, our journey will continue toward places where water hides more deeply beneath ice, in darkness, shielded from cosmic winds. But before moving on, allow yourself to remain a little longer with this red planet, not as a warning, but as a whisper, that not every world is held, that life is a fragile balance, and that the fact you are still here, still breathing, still listening, is already the result of many things that did not disappear. If your eyelids grow heavy, if images of ancient Martian rivers fade, let them drift away. That planet has been silent for a very long time. And you too may allow yourself to be silent a little longer before sleep arrives. After listening to the story of a world that once held water and then slowly dried, our journey does not end in loss. For Mars, silent and cold as it is, has not spoken its final word. Hidden beneath that dark red surface are still delicate traces, like whispers that have not entirely faded. Traces of water, not rivers still flowing, not oceans spread beneath blue skies, but subsurface ice minerals once touched by water, thin dark streaks running down slopes, appearing and vanishing with the seasons. Like memories, like emotions that have retreated deep within, yet never truly disappeared. Science names them precisely and coolly: subsurface ice-hydrated minerals, recurring slope lineae. Necessary words, accurate words. But if we listen more slowly, something else emerges. That water on Mars did not vanish completely. It withdrew. It sought shelter. It hid from harsh conditions the way life itself so often does. Beneath layers of rock and soil at higher latitudes, water ice still exists, frozen in darkness, shielded from radiation. Within ancient minerals, crystalline structures still bear the imprint of water once present, as if the planet does not wish to forget itself, as if it preserves small pieces of evidence in case someone patient enough might one day listen. And then there are seasons when temperatures rise just slightly and dark streaks appear along slopes. They are quiet, brief, only enough to suggest that briny water, extremely salty, may have flowed. Not much, not for long, but enough to reopen a question once thought closed. Might Mars still be alive in a very different sense? Salt water is inhospitable to humans. Yet on Earth, it was precisely such harsh environments that taught microbial life how to endure. In high salinity, under great pressure, in deep darkness, life does not require abundance, only time and a place to hide. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote "Either our life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Mars allows us to hear this line in an unusual way. Only by looking back do we realize how close this planet once came to a different path. But it was not allowed to continue along it. And now we stand before what remains, not to revive the past, but to understand the present and to approach the future with care. In these traces of water, humans see not only the possibility of microbes, they see the possibility of themselves. The idea of Mars as a future home does not arise from ambition alone. It comes from a familiar feeling when a place can no longer support us, we look elsewhere. But Mars does not invite us as Earth once did. It demands. It is harsh. It forces humans to carry everything with them: air, water, warmth, life. And within that difficulty, a deeper question arises. Are we searching for a new home or learning to understand the value of the old one? Albert Einstein once wrote in The World as I See It, "A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe." If humans truly are part of that whole, then learning to live on Mars is not merely an expansion of habitat. It is a dialogue with limits, with responsibility, with the question of what makes a place a home. Mars, with its subsurface ice and seasonal brines, offers no promise of ease. But it reminds us that life does not always flourish dramatically. Sometimes it exists at the bare minimum, enough to wait, enough not to disappear entirely. There is a very quiet healing in this idea, that even when a world has lost most of what once sustained it, something still remains. Not to display itself, not to boast, simply to exist. The inner life of humans is much the same. There are periods when we feel dried out, when the currents that once nourished inspiration, meaning connection, seem to have vanished. Yet rarely does everything disappear completely. It withdraws, it hides, it waits for conditions gentle enough to return even briefly. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos; in all disorder, a secret order. The dark streaks on Mars, the water-bearing minerals, the silent pockets of ice, all are expressions of a hidden order, unannounced, unloud, but enough to say that the story is not finished. And if one day humans set foot on Mars, not merely as explorers but as temporary residents, what they will carry with them will not only be technology, they will carry memory of Earth, of freely flowing water, of thick air, of a world once easy to live on and therefore easy to take for granted. Mars, in its severity, may teach humanity how to value things again, not through words, but through silence. As you listen to these words, you may not be thinking about leaving Earth, but you may be thinking about inner landscapes, places that were once alive, then grew quiet. And this does not have to mean failure. It may simply be a period of shelter. From the remaining traces of water on Mars, our journey will continue toward worlds where water is not merely leftover but more deeply protected beneath ice in thick darkness, far from the sun's direct gaze. But before moving on, allow yourself to remain a little longer with this red planet, with brief streaks of brine, with silent pockets of ice, with the idea that not all life needs to be brilliant to be meaningful. If your breathing has slowed, if your mind has begun to settle, let these images gently dissolve. Mars has learned how to wait for millions of years, and you, right now, may also allow yourself to wait in quiet peace until sleep arrives very softly. After leaving Mars, a world that once held water and learned how to exist in absence, our journey drifts farther outward toward a place unfamiliar with the very idea of a surface. There is no ground to stand on, no ocean to mirror the sky, no quiet in the way humans understand it. There is only motion, only storms, and a force vast enough to shape the fate of the entire solar system. Jupiter. Jupiter is not a planet meant for living. It does not invite. It does not promise. It exists as an immense heavy presence with gravity so deep that everything around it must adjust its path. When we look at Jupiter, we are not looking at a place. We are looking at a process unfolding continuously without pause for billions of years. The Great Red Spot is the clearest symbol of that process. A storm larger than Earth itself swirling within Jupiter's dense atmosphere for centuries. Not days, not years, but spans of time so vast that humans can only record them with humility. While storms on Earth are born and fade away, the Great Red Spot remains changing shape, shifting in strength, but never disappearing. There is something strangely compelling about this storm. It does not feel like absolute chaos. It has structure, rhythm, repetition, as though even within violence, nature finds an order of its own. And perhaps this is why Jupiter does not only inspire fear, but reflection. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "One must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." Jupiter is the physical embodiment of that idea, a mass of chaos from which long-lasting structures emerge. There is no stillness, but there is dynamic balance, no peace, but endurance. Throughout the history of the solar system, Jupiter has absorbed countless impacts. Asteroids, comets, wandering fragments drawn into its immense gravitational well. Each scar appears, then fades within the thick atmosphere as though the planet possesses its own quiet way of healing. It does not keep marks. It does not complain. It simply continues to turn. There are moments when astronomers witness a large object plunge into Jupiter and vanish in a brief flash of light, a swift ending leaving nothing behind. And in those moments, humanity becomes aware of a silent role Jupiter has played for billions of years. It stands there not as a hero, but as a mass large enough to attract danger before it can travel farther inward. Jupiter acts like a shield, not perfect, not absolute, but sufficient to change probabilities, sufficient to reduce the number of catastrophic impacts Earth must face, sufficient to create stretches of quiet in history where life can continue to experiment. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Jupiter stands there as an immense obstacle, and precisely because of that, it becomes a path, not one that leads forward, but one that allows what is fragile within to endure longer. There is a deep meaning hidden in this role. That protection does not always take a gentle form. Sometimes it is raw, cold, indifferent force. Jupiter does not know it is protecting Earth. It has no intention. It simply exists according to its mass. And it is precisely this indifference that makes its role enduring. In the inner life of humans, there are also such Jupiters, heavy experiences, psychological structures formed early, parts of us large enough to absorb shock to shield more delicate parts from shattering. They are not always pleasant, but often they are what have kept us standing through impacts we never fully noticed. When we look at Jupiter, we also confront the limits of what stability means. This planet never stands still. It has no surface to settle upon. Yet within its constant motion are repeating patterns, streams of gas that hold their form for centuries. Stability, it turns out, does not require immobility. It can be the ability to continue without falling apart. This mirrors how humans exist in the modern world. Few of us have a truly quiet surface. Everything is in motion: work, information, emotion. But if there are inner structures strong enough, storms can pass without destroying everything. Jupiter is not beautiful in a comforting way, but it offers another kind of beauty, the beauty of endurance, of continuing to exist without any promise of peace. As you lie here listening, you may be carrying storms of your own, circling thoughts, colliding memories, invisible forces that keep the mind unsettled. And this does not mean you are failing. Perhaps you are more like Jupiter than you realize, holding so that more vulnerable parts do not have to absorb the full impact. From Jupiter, our journey will continue toward places with different kinds of beauty, different rhythms, more subtle laws. But before leaving, allow yourself to remain a little longer with this storm-laden planet. Not to feel fear, but to understand that strength does not always need to be displayed. Sometimes it only needs to exist in the right place. The great red spot is still turning. Impacts still occur. And Jupiter still stands there, silent, heavy, unacknowledged. If your breathing has slowed, if images of storms begin to fade, let them dissolve into the darkness. Jupiter does not ask you to understand it. It only reminds you that even within chaos, there are structures strong enough to support. And tonight, perhaps you too are being supported in this way enough to let go and allow sleep to arrive very gently. After passing Jupiter, where raw power and chaos arrange themselves into enduring structures, our journey slows as we approach another world. Lighter, farther away, and in many ways quieter. Saturn. If Jupiter is a roar, Saturn is a whisper. It does not overwhelm through mass, but captivates through form. Its thin rings, spread wide like symbols drawn across space, make Saturn feel more like an idea than a planet. And at the North Pole of that world exists something even stranger than its outward beauty, a perfectly shaped, hexagonal storm rotating steadily in the atmosphere for decades. Not a circle, not a spiral, but a hexagon, a form humans often associate with honeycombs, crystals, and ordered structure. That such a precise geometry appears amid extreme weather within an environment utterly inhospitable to life causes many to linger longer than expected. Not because it is dangerous, but because it feels right in a way that is difficult to explain. This hexagonal storm does not stand still. It is the result of high-speed jet streams of standing waves formed when different currents meet in just the right rhythm. There is no architect, no prior design, only motion repeating itself long enough for order to emerge. There is something deeply resonant in this image, that sometimes order does not arise from control, but from allowing things to move according to their nature. Plato once wrote in Timaeus that the universe is built upon geometry, though that view belongs more to metaphysics than to modern science. Saturn invites us to pause and listen. For even within an unstable atmosphere, geometry finds a place to settle. Not the geometry of blackboards, but living geometry sustained by rhythm. The standing waves in Saturn's atmosphere are not so different from what happens within the human mind. When streams of thought collide, when emotions rise and fall, when opposing forces meet and persist long enough, sometimes a pattern appears. Not to resolve everything, but to hold it in a form that can be endured. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Look beneath the surface. Let not the several quality of a thing nor its worth escape thee." Looking at Saturn, we are compelled to look beyond the beauty of its rings. Beneath them lie brutal weather winds of unimaginable speed and ceaseless exchanges of energy. And yet within these conditions, the hexagonal storm retains its shape, not perfect, not eternal, but long enough to be observed, remembered, and contemplated. Perhaps this is Saturn's lesson. Not that order is the ultimate goal, but that order can be a temporary state arising when elements are allowed to repeat without being forced. Humans often seek stability as a resting point. Saturn shows that stability can also be steady motion, an unhurried rotation, a repeating rhythm that needs no intervention. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in The Gay Science, "There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness." Saturn's hexagonal storm contains both meteorological madness and a reason hidden within, chaos patient enough to become geometry. When we think of extreme weather, we usually think of threat, but on Saturn, weather threatens no one. It simply is. There are no beings to destroy, no cities to devastate, only gas energy and time. A great deal of time. And because of this, Saturn becomes a safe mirror through which humans can contemplate chaos, not in fear, but in curiosity. Not to escape it, but to understand that chaos is not always the opposite of order. Sometimes it is the condition that allows order to appear. In the inner life, there are also such hexagonal storms, patterns of behavior loops of thought, recurring emotions. We often try to break them, erase them. Saturn does not break its storm. It allows it to exist, and within that allowance, form is preserved. Carl Jung once wrote in Psychological Types, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Saturn is a prolonged reaction between currents of gas, between heat and cold, between fast and slow motion. And the result of that reaction is not explosion, but a relatively stable form enough to endure enough to tell its story. As you lie here listening, your mind may also be moving through different currents. One part wanting rest, one part still in motion, one part searching for form. And none of this needs to be resolved right now. Saturn does not hurry. It turns slowly. It allows time to do its work. From Jupiter to Saturn, our journey seems to shift from force to structure, from collision to form. And from here, our gaze will travel farther still, to tilted worlds, to seasons lasting decades, to axes of rotation that defy familiar intuition. But before leaving Saturn, allow yourself to remain a little longer with that hexagonal storm. Not to understand it completely, but to feel that even within chaos, there are laws gentle enough not to wound. Geometry is still turning, the winds are still blowing, and Saturn remains there, needing no explanation, no purpose. If your breathing has slowed, if the sharp edges of the hexagon begin to soften in your imagination, let that happen. That planet has turned for billions of years without human attention. And you, in this moment, do not need to do anything at all except allow yourself to drift toward sleep, with the sense that order is not always something we must create, but sometimes something we only need enough patience to recognize. After passing through the strange forms of Saturn, where order can arise even in the midst of chaos, our journey continues away from familiar light, not upward, but inward, into darkness, into places sunlight has never reached yet, where water, the fragile condition of life, quietly persists. Europa and Enceladus. At first glance, these worlds offer no promise. They are cold, pale, sealed beneath ice tens of kilometers thick. No forests, no open oceans, no blue sky to look up toward. And yet, within that enclosure, a rare possibility opens dark oceans. Beneath Europa's ice lies a vast, salty ocean deeper than all of Earth's oceans combined. No light, no day or night. Only pressure, slow movement, and heat generated by tidal forces as the parent planet pulls, releases, and pulls again steadily, patiently over immense time. Enceladus, much smaller, reveals its secret more openly, plumes of water and ice erupting straight into space, carrying salt organic molecules and signs of a world still active within. There is something gentle yet profound in this image. That water, a symbol of life, does not need to display itself. It can hide. It can be sheltered by darkness. And within that shelter, possibility endures. Humans have long linked life to light, to photosynthesis, to illuminated surfaces. But Europa and Enceladus whisper another possibility, that life need not see the sky. It may exist in eternal night, sustained by chemistry, by heat from within, by reactions slow yet resilient. The philosopher Baruch Spinoza once wrote in Ethics, "Nature does nothing uselessly." If nature has formed these dark oceans, perhaps it was not for decoration nor for curiosity alone, but to expand our sense of what is possible, to remind us that life is not bound by human intuition, that it need not resemble us to be meaningful. In Europa's darkness, if life exists, it would not know the sun. It would have no concept of dawn or dusk. Its rhythm would not be measured in days, but in tides. With no light to guide it, only flow, pressure, and time unfolding. There is a quiet healing in this idea, that even when we feel ourselves in darkness, unseen, unlit, unacknowledged, this does not mean we are not alive. Some forms of life flourish only when light recedes. Carl Jung once wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "In the realm of the unconscious, there is a twilight state that can be illuminating. Europa and Enceladus seem to dwell in that very twilight, neither bright nor fully dark, but dim enough for other possibilities to arise. Oceans without light remind us that life is not only surface. It is depth. It is quiet continuation. The plumes of Enceladus, casting water and ice into space, resemble breaths. No words, no declarations. Only enough to say that something within still moves. And that movement is not chaotic. It carries salt, a sign of long-standing water. It carries organic molecules, the basic building blocks of life. Not proof, but an invitation. Humans often want clear answers, yes or no, alive or not alive. But the universe does not operate on such simple binaries. It opens gray spaces, incomplete possibilities, stories not yet concluded. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." Europa and Enceladus do not climb toward the light. They remain in darkness. Yet their existence alone fills a gap in how we understand the universe, reminding us that meaning is not only where things are visible, but where patience allows waiting. When we imagine life without sunlight, we are also reconsidering ourselves. Those periods in inner life when clear goals fade, when external motivation dims, when we must rely on other energies, memory connection, inner rhythm to continue. Europa and Enceladus do not need to be seen to exist. They require no audience, no validation. And perhaps that is a rare kind of freedom. From these dark oceans, our journey learns to listen to life at a different tempo, slower, deeper, less exposed. And within that rhythm, humans are invited to do the same, not always to shine, not always to face outward. As you lie here listening, darkness may surround you. The lights are off, the outer world has receded, but that does not mean everything has stopped. Like Europa, like Enceladus, beneath the still surface, there are small, steady movements, breath, heartbeat, thought gently slowing. From the dark oceans, our journey will continue toward tilted worlds, extended seasons, axes of rotation that defy familiar intuition. But before moving farther, allow yourself to remain here a little longer, in safe darkness, in a sense of being held. Water does not need light to be water. Life does not need noise to exist. And you right now do not need to do anything more to deserve rest. If your eyelids are closing, let the darkness do its work. Europa has done this for billions of years. Enceladus as well. And in this vast universe, darkness is not an absence, but a space deep enough for something fragile to continue living very quietly for a very long time. After remaining within the safe darkness of Europa and Enceladus, where life may exist without light, our journey drifts even farther toward a world that seems to have turned away from every familiar intuition: Uranus. If other planets circle the sun like dancers maintaining their balance, Uranus lies completely on its side, not slightly tilted, not hesitating, but inclined so deeply that its axis of rotation is nearly parallel to its orbital plane. A planet lying sideways, turning slowly, accepting its own strangeness for billions of years. The result of this inclination is seasons that last for decades. One half of the planet immersed in continuous light, the other in unending darkness. No daily sunrise, no familiar sunset. Only vast stretches of time long enough for light to become a state and darkness to become one as well. There is something profoundly quiet in that rhythm, as if not every world requires rapid change to endure. Some places let time pass like a cold wind, steady, slow, and in no hurry to explain itself. Scientists believe this unusual tilt is the trace of an ancient collision, an event powerful enough to knock Uranus sideways, but not enough to destroy it. After that impact, the planet did not attempt to stand upright again. It continued to turn along a new axis in a new rhythm oriented in a way unlike any other. Perhaps in the universe there is no concept of a correct posture. There is only the posture that happened and the capacity to continue from there. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "The universe is change, our life is what our thoughts make it." Uranus is the embodiment of change that was never undone. A change large enough to rewrite the climate, the magnetic field, and the seasons of an entire world. Yet this change carries no tragedy. It is simply different. Uranus's atmosphere reflects this same dislocation. Winds blow along asymmetrical paths. Clouds of methane ice drift quietly beneath pale blue light. The planet's magnetic field does not pass through its center but is sharply offset, as though even its core is uncertain of where it belongs. A world where even the invisible force of protection does not stand in the expected place. And yet Uranus endures, not loudly, not violently, not with the grandeur of Jupiter, nor the geometry of Saturn. It turns slowly, holding its oddness without seeking justification. There is a strange kind of healing in this image, that not every deviation needs to be corrected. Some collisions leave permanent marks in the universe and in human lives. And sometimes what matters is not returning to the former state, but learning how to exist within the new one. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." Uranus carries the chaos of that ancient collision, yet does not let it become an ending. Instead, chaos stretches into rhythm, tilt transforms into seasons, and strangeness becomes identity. From afar, Uranus does not command attention. It has no radiant rings like Saturn, no dramatic storms like Jupiter. But perhaps it is precisely this quietness that invites deeper contemplation. For within human inner life, there are also Uranus's parts knocked sideways by an event, a loss, an unwelcome change. Afterward, things no longer move according to familiar cycles. Inner seasons last longer than expected. Joy arrives slowly. Sorrow lingers. And we often ask ourselves, when will I return to normal? But Uranus does not return to normal. It redefines normal in its own way. And perhaps that is its gentle reminder, that not all healing is a return. Some healing is a continuation along a different axis. Carl Jung once wrote in the Red Book, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Uranus did not choose the collision, but it chose to keep turning. And in that choice, it kept every trace, not erased, not hidden, not denied. As you lie here listening, you too may be within a prolonged season, a stretch of light that lasts too long, or a darkness that feels too deep. And this does not mean you are lost. Perhaps you are simply rotating along a different axis temporarily or forever. From Uranus, our journey will continue toward technical mysteries, orbital anomalies, questions science has not yet fully answered. But before leaving this tilted planet, allow yourself to remain a little longer with the sense that difference is not always a mistake. A collision can change everything.
A tilted axis can create long seasons, and a world can still exist very quietly within that very imbalance. If your breathing has slowed, if the image of a sideways planet in pale blue darkness begins to fade, let it drift away. Uranus has turned for billions of years without human understanding. And you, in this moment, do not need to understand yourself completely. Just continue along your axis, very slowly, very quietly. After passing through tilted worlds where an ancient collision could shape the seasons and the very rhythm of a planet's rotation, our journey touches another kind of deviation, not of planets, but of the machines humans have built. Spacecraft calculated with precise equations, launched with the confidence that physics holds control, and then almost imperceptibly they drift off course. Not in a dramatic way. No explosion, no sudden loss of signal, just a very small discrepancy, a residual acceleration, an unanticipated pull.
A number that does not quite match the table. Small enough to be ignored at first, persistent enough over time to become a question. These technical anomalies, the pioneer anomaly, the flyby anomaly, the subtle deviations hidden within data, do not destroy science. On the contrary, they reveal something deeply human, that our understanding, however refined, is still incomplete, and the universe is under no obligation to operate according to what we have written down. There is a particular silence in the moment scientists realize this. Not the silence of failure, but the silence of standing before the unknown. A pause, a breath, an acceptance that there are forces we have not yet named. Karl Popper once wrote in The Logic of Scientific Discovery, "Our knowledge can only be finite, while our ignorance must necessarily be infinite." Science at its core is not a finished system. It is an ongoing process of learning in which every answer opens the door to further questions. Spacecraft that drift off course are not signs of absolute error, but whispers from reality itself. Look again at your model. In the quiet of the night, as you listen to these stories, your own mind may have drifted off course as well. Not because you lacked effort, not because you were not intelligent enough, but because there are invisible forces, memory, emotion, circumstance that were never included in the equation. We often believe that if we calculate carefully enough, if we control tightly enough, everything will move in the right direction. But inner life, like the universe, does not always follow initial assumptions. There are small errors that accumulate until one day we realize we are traveling along a different orbit. And that does not necessarily mean something has gone wrong. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Philosophical Investigations, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Perhaps what we do not yet understand does not fail to exist. Perhaps we simply do not yet have the language to describe it. Technical anomalies in space resemble vague sensations within the mind. They appear at the edges of what can be named. When a spacecraft deviates, engineers do not rush to deny the data. They observe, they measure again, they listen to the signal, and most importantly, they maintain humility before reality. For science does not advance through absolute certainty, but through the willingness to question even what once seemed settled. There is a very subtle kind of healing in this attitude, that you do not need to understand everything about yourself immediately. You do not need to force your mind back onto the correct orbit, simply because it once traveled there. Perhaps what is needed now is only gentle observation to notice which forces are pulling you. Albert Einstein once said, "The more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know." This is not discouragement, it is freedom. Freedom from the illusion that we must be in complete control. Freedom to admit that parts of the world and of ourselves still lie beyond the map. Technical anomalies remind us that our current physical models, powerful as they are, remain models. They are approximations of reality, not reality itself. And in the gaps between model and world, curiosity is born. Just as in inner life, where moments of not understanding ourselves often mark the beginning of transformation, not when everything is clear, but when we are brave enough to remain with uncertainty. Martin Heidegger once wrote, "In being and time, questioning is the piety of thought." To ask questions is an act of respect for the world, for our own limits, and for a learning process with no final endpoint. When science accepts that it is still learning, it becomes softer, less dogmatic, and closer to the spirit of healing than we might expect. Because healing is not fixing everything, but learning to live in peace with what remains unfixed. If you are tired, if your mind feels misaligned, remember that even the most precise machines ever sent into space have drifted off course. And it is precisely from these deviations that understanding expands. Tonight, you do not need to recalibrate everything. You do not need to explain every discrepancy. Let the questions remain as they are signs of a living, breathing mind. From here, the journey will move deeper still toward the origins of time and space themselves, where even the concept of an orbit has not yet formed. But before leaving this chapter, allow yourself to rest in the safety of not knowing. The universe does not demand that we understand it completely. Science does not demand perfection. And you do not need to be the correctly oriented version of yourself right now. Just listen. Just remain. And let your mind, like a spacecraft drifting through silent space, continue its journey very slowly, very gently, without needing to know exactly where it is going. After passing through the smallest deviations of spacecraft, where science learns humility, before the unknown, the flow of our journey suddenly grows still, as if the entire universe were drawing a very deep breath. And then we arrive at the question to which all other questions have been quietly leading. When did everything begin? The Big Bang was not a loud explosion in empty space. It had no center to point to, no audience to witness it. The Big Bang was the moment when space itself opened and time itself began to flow. Before that, there was not darkness, not silence. There was simply no before to be named. Our language begins to tremble here. In the first moments, the universe was so hot and dense that no structure could exist. No atoms, no free light. Only a thick sea of energy where everything overlapped so completely that the very idea of distance had not yet been born. And then slowly, by the universe's own measure, expansion began. Not that galaxies flew outward, but that the space between them stretched. There is something deeply comforting in this image. That a beginning does not have to be violent. That a universe can be born from expansion rather than destruction. And that sometimes the first thing required for anything to exist is simply to make room. As the universe cooled, energy allowed particles to pair. Protons and neutrons found one another. Atoms began to form. And about 380,000 years after the Big Bang, a brief instant compared to 13.8 billion years light was finally free to travel. That light is still here, spreading in every direction, cooled and stretched into microwaves. We call it the cosmic microwave background, the gentle echo of origin. When scientists see this radiation, they do not see with their eyes. They listen with instruments, a signal that is remarkably even, remarkably smooth, and unimaginably ancient. It tells no story through images, but through temperature, tiny ripples just enough to seed galaxies, stars, and planets, like the first faint wrinkles on a still surface of water from which every current begins. There is a strange tenderness in knowing that the oldest light we have ever observed carries no personal message. It is not directed toward us, it simply exists. And that existence, persistent across billions of years, tells us that the universe was once very young and very hot, like all beginnings. Stephen Hawking once wrote in A Brief History of Time, "Time itself had a beginning." This sentence does not close the question, it opens a deeper silence. If time has a beginning, then what is before the question does not ask for a hurried answer. It invites us to sit beside the uncertainty and remain. In the night, as you listen to these words, you may be carrying a big bang of your own, a beginning you cannot clearly remember. An event that opened new space within you, painful, confusing, yet necessary. And like the young universe, you expanded in your own way, making room for what would come next. There is a very slow rhythm in the way the universe tells its story. It does not rush to prove anything. It does not need to persuade. The cosmic background radiation does not say, "Believe me." It is simply there everywhere, favoring no direction. And it is precisely this indifference that makes it trustworthy. Albert Einstein once said, "The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible." Yet perhaps what makes the universe gentle is not that we can understand it, but that we do not need to understand all of it in order to be within it. The Big Bang gives us a frame of time. The background radiation gives us a whisper. What remains is space where thought is allowed to breathe. If you feel lighter when you imagine everything beginning from a state of simplicity that is not accidental. In inner life, enduring beginnings rarely come from fullness. They come from release, from allowing space to open so that something new may form. When that ancient light reaches human instruments, it carries no personal memory. But it carries the history of everything, a history that does not need to be remembered in detail to have meaning. Knowing that it existed and still spreads is enough to feel held. Martin Heidegger once wrote in Being and Time, "Being is the transcendence pure and simple. Existence surpasses all concepts." In this sense, the Big Bang is not an event to be argued over, but a resting place for contemplation. It reminds us that every structure has a beginning, and every beginning is fragile. Yet fragility does not mean weakness. Fragility is what allows subtlety to exist. As you lie still, if the image of an expanding universe slows your breathing, let it do so. There is no need to imagine details. Only feel that space can open without force, that time can begin to flow without justification. From here, the journey will continue into the paradoxes of the night sky, into a void that is not empty, into invisible forces shaping every structure. But in this chapter, allow yourself to remain a little longer beside that most ancient light, not to understand, simply to be with it. The universe began without witnesses. Light spread without listeners. And you in this moment can also begin again very gently, simply by allowing your mind a little more space to rest. Let that expansion continue, very slowly, very far, and very still. After touching the moment when time and space were born, when the first light was released, our journey does not rush onward but pauses almost imperceptibly. Like stepping outside at night, lifting your gaze and realizing something that feels obvious yet deeply mysterious. The night sky is dark. If the universe contains countless stars spread in every direction, then by intuition, the sky should be blazing with light. From any line of sight in any direction, one should eventually encounter a star. And yet, night remains dark, profoundly dark, like deep velvet, absorbing rather than reflecting, silent rather than loud. This question, simple enough for a child, has followed humanity for centuries. It is known as the paradox of the dark night sky. In the quiet of this question, science and philosophy meet, not to argue, but to acknowledge together that human intuition, however subtle, still needs the support of a broader context. The answer does not lie in light, but in time. The universe has not existed forever in a way that would allow light to fill every corner. It has a beginning. And because light requires time to travel, there are stars, even as they exist, whose light has not yet reached where we stand. The sky is dark, not because there are too few stars, but because there has not been enough time. And even light that has already set out does not remain unchanged. As space expands, light is stretched, red-shifted, gradually slipping beyond the range human eyes can see. It does not vanish. It quietly changes its language. There is something gentle in the way the universe treats light. It does not erase it. It does not extinguish it. It simply stretches it until we can no longer hear it. The night sky is dark because the universe is finite in time, not because it is stingy with light. And within this understanding, a quiet comfort appears. Darkness is not absence. It is the sign of a history still unfolding, not yet complete. Blaise Pascal once wrote in Pensées, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me." But perhaps when we understand why the night sky is dark, that silence becomes less frightening. It becomes a space to breathe, a pause between waves of light tirelessly traveling onward. In inner life, there are such night skies as well. Space is not empty of meaning, but where meaning is still on its way. Feelings that have not yet arrived. Understandings not yet named. We often rush to fill that darkness with sound, with answers, with artificial light. But the universe does not hurry. The expansion of space teaches us another rhythm, to allow distance to let light stretch slowly enough to stop treating darkness as an enemy. Martin Heidegger once wrote in Being and Time, "Only in the darkness does the light appear as light. If everything were bright, light would lose its meaning. If every question were answered immediately, reflection would have no place to stand." The dark night sky is not only a physical fact, but a condition for contemplation. As you lie still listening to these words, the lights may be off, the room may be growing darker, and in that darkness your mind begins to slow, not because it lacks stimulation, but because it is no longer forced to react. Just as light is red-shifted, thought too can be stretched, softened before dissolving into silence. A universe finite in time reminds us that not everything has already happened. Not every light has arrived. And so darkness is not a conclusion. It is the initial condition for what is still forming. Albert Einstein once said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious." The dark night sky preserves that mystery gently, evenly. It does not demand understanding. It simply invites us to look and to remain without needing to know everything. If you are seeking a reason to allow yourself to rest, this may be one gentle reason. Even the universe does not reveal everything at once. It leaves space. It allows waiting. It does not rush to illuminate every shadow. From this dark night sky, our journey will continue into a void that is not empty, into invisible forces weaving the structure of all things. But in this moment, allow yourself to pause beneath that sky, not to search for stars, not to count the light, only to feel that darkness can be kind. The universe does not lack light. It is simply telling its story very slowly. And you on this night do not lack meaning. Perhaps you are simply in a necessary darkness, a place where the mind is allowed to rest, and sleep is allowed to arrive very gently, very deeply, just as the night sky has always been. After standing for a long time beneath the dark night sky where light has not yet arrived and darkness is no longer frightening, our journey quietly takes one more step, not toward the stars, but into the space between them, into what we often call with a very simple word, nothingness. In everyday language, nothing sounds like absolute absence, a void, an ending. But in the language of science, nothingness is far more subtle. It is not complete emptiness. It is a minimal state where energy is not zero, where quantum fields still whisper with tiny fluctuations, where pairs of particles and antiparticles can appear and disappear in intervals so brief they leave no trace. Nothingness, it turns out, is not as quiet as we imagine. Even when everything has been removed, matter, light, heat, space itself remains. And within that space, quantum fluctuations still occur. Not by intention, not for a purpose, simply because the laws allow them to. Like faint ripples on a lake that appears perfectly still, they do not break the silence, but make the silence quietly alive. There is something deeply healing in this idea, that even when we feel we are in nothing, it does not mean everything is ended. Perhaps we are simply in a minimal state where energy is low, where nothing needs to perform, where every movement is small and honest. Some physicists have suggested that the universe itself may have emerged from nothing. But this nothing is not the philosophical void of old. It is a state without structure, yet not without potential. A foundation thin enough for something to arise. In many Eastern philosophies, emptiness is not the opposite of existence. It is the condition for existence. What is striking is that modern science, in a very different way, has touched a similar intuition. That nothing is not a dead void, but a field of possibility. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." There are things like nothingness that cannot be fully described by language. Every word carries images, limits, and assumptions. When science speaks of vacuum energy, it does not try to romanticize it. Yet in that cold precision, another kind of beauty appears, the beauty of admitting that even silence has structure. If the universe could emerge from a minimal state, then beginnings do not need to be dramatic. They do not require excess. They do not require perfect preparation. They only require conditions close enough for possibility to be triggered. This is very different from how we often treat ourselves. We tend to believe that to begin again, we need more energy, more motivation, more clarity. But the universe did the opposite. It began at the lowest possible level and allowed expansion to happen on its own. Albert Einstein once said, "Nature shows us only the tail of the lion. We do not see the whole lion. Only traces, effects, consequences. Nothingness is the same. We cannot touch it or measure it directly. We only observe its subtle influences, tiny differences in energy fluctuations that cannot be completely erased. And from those very small things, an immense story unfolds. In inner life, there are also periods when we feel empty. No clear emotion, no shining goal, no great longing. And we quickly label that state as meaningless. But perhaps it is simply a vacuum state, a moment of rebalancing where energy has dropped to the lowest level necessary to not collapse. Martin Heidegger once wrote, "The nothing itself, nothings." It is a difficult sentence, but it points to something essential. Nothingness is not passive. It has its own quiet activity, subtle, elusive. It does not create events, but it creates the possibility of events. When we lie still at night without clear thoughts, without vivid dreams, the mind also enters a kind of vacuum. Thoughts come and go without attachment, not because we are empty, but because we are at a very low energy level, low enough to rest. In this way, the universe also knows how to rest. Between great events, between radiant epochs of stars and galaxies, there are vast stretches of quiet. And within those stretches, structure is preserved and possibility is held. If nothingness were truly empty, the universe could never have arisen. And if you were truly empty, you would not be able to feel that emptiness. Feeling itself is already a form of energy. There is a deep comfort in realizing that nothing is not the bottom. It is the ground, the lowest support from which everything else can emerge. From this chapter, our journey will continue toward invisible forces that make up most of the universe, toward structures woven from what we cannot see. But before moving on, allow yourself to remain here a little longer in this nothingness, not to find answers, not to create meaning, just to be. Nothingness does not ask you to become anything. It simply allows you for a moment to not be anything at all. And in that moment, when all demands fall quiet, when energy is allowed to reach its minimum, perhaps very gently, a new possibility will appear. Not loudly, not with certainty, but enough to continue, just as the universe once did. After lingering within nothingness, where nothing itself still trembles, our journey moves onward into a paradox, gentler yet deeper. Not emptiness, but fullness made of what we cannot see. Most of the universe, it turns out, does not appear before our eyes. It stands quietly behind every form, every motion, every story of stars and galaxies. We give it provisional names, dark matter and dark energy. When humans first realized that galaxies rotate faster than visible mass alone could explain, they did not rush to deny the data. They listened, and in that listening, something profoundly humble emerged. An invisible force is holding structures together. It emits no light. It reflects nothing. It does not interact like familiar matter. Yet it is strong enough to underwrite all large-scale motion. Dark matter does not tell its story through light. It speaks through gravity. Like an unseen skeleton, it allows galaxies to remain intact, star clusters not to fly apart. We do not see it, but without it, the night sky would not possess the order we know. There is something quietly comforting in this image, that what matters most does not need to shine. Some foundations simply do their work in silence, and it is precisely that silence that makes them enduring. Then there is dark energy. Not a force that binds, but one that pushes apart. Something that not only causes the universe to expand, but causes that expansion to accelerate over time. Galaxies are not merely moving away from one another, they are doing so faster and faster. Not because they choose to, but because the space between them is opening, deepening, widening like a breath that never quite ends. There is a strange rhythm here. Dark matter prevents collapse. Dark energy drives separation. One binds, one releases, and the universe exists not by choosing one over the other, but by allowing both to coexist. Baruch Spinoza once wrote in Ethics, "Nothing in nature is random." Even the forces we do not yet understand are not accidental. They have roles, they have places, they have rhythms of their own. The universe does not require us to name them correctly in order for them to do their work. In inner life, there are also forms of dark matter. Memories rarely spoken, foundational beliefs formed early, invisible bonds that keep us standing when we feel close to falling apart. We do not always recognize them, but without them, our inner structure might collapse very quickly. And there is also dark energy impulses that push us away from what is familiar, changes that cannot be undone. distances that grow between us and former versions of ourselves. We often fear that outward push, but the universe does not. The universe does. It allows expansion to continue, not as an error, but as a process. Carl Jung once wrote in Modern Man, In Search of a Soul, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. Between binding and release, between structure and expansion, the universe oscillates, and it is within that oscillation that structure is maintained. No pole exists alone. No single force is sufficient by itself. When we say that most of the universe consists of what we cannot see, this need not discourage us. It can soften us. For if even the universe relies on the invisible to exist, then a human being's incomplete understanding of themselves is not a failure. It is a condition." Albert Einstein once said, "Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. What we see, stars, planets, light, is only the surface. What lies beneath is no less real, only unnecessary, to display itself in order to be effective. And in accepting this, a quiet peace appears. We do not need to reveal everything to have value. Dark energy causes the universe to expand, yet it does not tear it apart all at once. The acceleration unfolds slowly on cosmic timescales. There is time for stars to be born and to fade, time for life to emerge and to reflect, time for you to lie here in a quiet night listening to these words. The universe, it turns out, is very patient with itself. In your own mind, if there are invisible forces holding you in place, know that they are doing their work. If there are forces pushing you away from something, know that expansion is not always loss. Sometimes it is the only way new space can appear. Martin Heidegger once wrote, "In poetry language thought the world worlds. The world does not merely exist, it unfolds. And it unfolds largely through what does not announce itself: dark matter, dark energy, invisible structures weaving the visible form." From here, our journey approaches its closing point, not a final answer, but a place to stand. A vantage from which to look back at humanity within a universe that grants no privileged center. But before moving on, allow yourself to remain a little longer with these invisible forces, not to understand them completely, only to trust that there are things holding you even when you cannot see them. The universe does not shine by light alone. It endures through silent forces. And tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy, perhaps those same invisible forces, the rhythm of breath, the beat of the heart, the faint expansion of quiet itself, are holding you just long enough for sleep to arrive very slowly, very deeply, and very gently. After passing through the invisible forces that weave the structure of the universe, things we cannot see yet, which hold all forms together, our journey returns to something very small. Not a center, not a destination, but the human being standing in an unprivileged place within a universe that offers no stage prepared for anyone. For centuries, humans believed themselves to be at the center of Earth, the center of the heavens, the center of meaning. But science slowly and patiently moved that center outward step by step. Earth is not the center of the solar system. The solar system is not the center of the galaxy, and our galaxy is only one among hundreds of billions. The universe has no center, and if it does, it is not here. This can sound cold, but within this non-specialness, a gentler idea emerges: the anthropic principle. The universe did not need to be designed for humans, yet its conditions, fragile and contingent, allowed humans to appear. Not by favor, but by possibility. We are not the goal of the universe. We are one of its outcomes. There is a quiet comfort in this understanding. Meaning does not come from being chosen, but from being. And being in a universe vast enough not to care is already rare. Carl Sagan once wrote in Cosmos, "We are a way for the universe to know itself." This does not place humanity on a pedestal. It places us within a flow. We do not stand outside the universe observing it as an object. We are part of the process through which the universe becomes thinkable, questionable, and felt. The universe does not favor humans. It does not promise safety. It does not guarantee happiness. It does not hand out meaning, but it allows. It allows atoms to combine. It allows stars to be born. It allows complex chemistry. It allows consciousness, late fragile, to emerge, and then to ask about itself. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in, "Thus spoke Zarathustra, man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss." Human beings stand on a rope, no absolute ground, no fixed center. And precisely because of that, every step carries weight. Every thought matters not because the universe needs them, but because we need them to continue. The anthropic principle does not say the universe exists so that humans can exist. It only says that if the universe were not like this, we would not be here to ask the question. And the question itself is already a deep form of presence. In a universe without a center, humans must find their footing elsewhere. Not in space, but in relationship with one another, with time, with values that are chosen rather than bestowed. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." The absence of a final answer does not imply meaninglessness. On the contrary, the lack of closure opens space for living. If everything were settled, if meaning were prepackaged, we would only obey. But in a universe that offers no guarantees, we are free, a freedom that is real, heavy, and deeply human. As night settles and you listen to these words, you may also be searching for a center of your own, a fixed point, a certain answer. But the universe, in its vast silence, whispers something else. You do not need to be at the center to matter. Value can arise from listening, from caring, from understanding that you are a small part, but not a meaningless one, of a very large structure. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, being toward death is the essence of existence. Awareness of finitude does not diminish us. It awakens us. Knowing time is limited, we choose more carefully how to live. Knowing the universe does not wait, we cherish quiet moments. This chapter does not end with an answer by design. For if this journey has shown us anything, it is that not every question must close. Some are meant to remain with us like silent companions, reminding us that there is always something larger than what we can grasp. From the oldest light, through cosmic darkness, through a nothingness that was never empty, through invisible forces, this journey does not lead to a center. It leads to a feeling of belonging very light. Not belonging because we were chosen, but belonging because we happened. The universe does not need you to understand it. It does not need you to prove anything. And in this moment, as every chapter slows, you may allow the final question to rest, not because it has been answered, but because you do not need it in order to sleep. You are very small in a very vast universe, and that quietly is enough. If your eyelids are closing, let them close. The universe will continue without a center, and you tonight may sleep deeply without knowing where you stand in the whole picture, knowing only that being here right now is already a silent miracle.